You can't pull a U-Haul to heaven with things of this world that you own. You can't pull a U-Haul to heaven or hold on to your gold when you're gone. Chances are you've heard either these lyrics by Hobson Smith or others like it by Renee Austin or Kenny Wayne Shepherd. I'll admit that when I first read through the lessons for today, I could not get these songs out of my head. In Colossians, we're advised, set your mind on things that are above, not on things that are of this earth. Later in Luke, we are warned, be on guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Then we're told a parable about a rich man who stores up his abundant harvest in hopes of spending the rest of his life in earthly paradise, where he can eat, drink, and be merry, only to be told that he will not live long enough to enjoy this abundance. Now, this hit me as rather ironic because the day before I read this parable in preparation for today, I took 20 of our parishioners to a lunch spot in Ocean Springs called Eat, Drink, and Love. It was really good. So I spent the first part of my week humming about U-Hauls and thinking about what it is that compels us to store up treasures on this earth. I recalled the ancient burial practices of the Egyptians, in which they took the most extreme measures to bury their treasure with them in order to take it to the next world. And I thought about how I would elaborate on this concept about how all the possessions that we spend so much time working to accumulate in this life do not follow us to the next. But as I sat with it for a while, I realized I'd be preaching to the choir. I mean, not the literal choir, because they don't join us until next week, but to all of you gathered here today. Because I would bet that there is not one single person in here that is banking on taking your worldly possessions with you to the pearly gates. So what wisdom are we to gain from these readings that we did not already bring with us to church today? What is it in these lessons that is going to challenge us to move forward in our spiritual journey and not to rest comfortably in the knowledge that we already have? Perhaps the lesson is more than just a warning about what happens to our possessions after we die. Perhaps it has something to tell us about what focusing on possessions can do to us here and now in this world. If you look at the beginning of the gospel lesson, it begins with someone asking Jesus to tell his brother to divide the family inheritance with him. Possessions in this case were coming between siblings and dividing family as they squabbled over the money that would be handed down to them. This reminded me of a bit of sage advice a friend once shared to me as we were talking about financial stewardship. He said, possessions in themselves are not innately bad. It's when your possessions begin to possess you that it's time to reevaluate. Possessions in themselves are not bad. It's when those possessions begin to possess us that we must be careful. Every clergy and funeral director can tell you that the heartbreaking scenario from today's gospel lesson is not all that rare. Family relationships are far too often torn apart over issues of money and inheritance. At a time when siblings and family members need each other the most, they allow possessions to divide them and to create distance between them when they could be leaning on each other for support in their time of grief. In the gospel lesson, Jesus is responding to someone wishing for security through wealth, but wealth cannot give him that security. And God alone is our security in both this world and in the next. We encounter God through our relationships with others. We encounter God through breaking bread and sharing the feast, not through storing it up and keeping our abundance to ourselves. Our security comes from the love of God as experienced through the love of others around us. When accumulating, guarding, and storing possessions becomes our focus, we've lost sight of God, and therefore of the true and steadfast, abundant life that He wishes for us. Abundance is not about having wealth. It's about what you do with that wealth once you have it. Holy Communion is in a time of abundance in so many wonderful ways. This is to be truly celebrated. Next week, we will cut the ribbon for yet another floor of renovated space as we open the lower level of Blaisdell for our youth. Beginning next week on Rally Day, all of our children and youth will be enjoying exciting new classrooms. However, this abundance will mean very little if we cannot find more of us who are willing to give the time and energy to raise our children in the life of faith. Having new and shiny ministry spaces is incredibly exciting, but these riches are not enough in themselves. The question remains, what will we do with what we have? How will we grow in our faith community? How will we share our stories and build relationships in the city from our new buildings? How will we share God's feast at our tables? If we stop at the buildings filled with riches, we will come up short, just as the rich man did. If we use these buildings to share the good news of God with one another and with the world, then we will be living our lives abundantly in this world with our eyes on the eternal promise given to us in the next. I, for one, am thrilled by the possibilities that lie before us. If we can do this from generation to generation in the church, then we won't have any trouble leaving our U-Hauls behind. Heck, we might even be glad to shed the weight because we know that our possessions are continuing to be shared in ways that bring about God's kingdom here on earth as we enter God's kingdom in the next. Amen.